There is no question that the Ampico system delivered wonderful music when it was new. With proper restoration, these pianos still produce music that keeps us spellbound and in awe. Should we allow the Ampico music to disappear or change? Keeping the Ampico music alive for generations to come is a project that must be taken seriously. We realize that original paper rolls have a limited lifespan. Accurate, new Ampico rolls are still produced on the original perforators, but other replacements may not be accurate copies for archival purposes. Small differences in punch diameter, perforator step rates, and other issues may result in minor changes to the original data. As the popularity of optical roll scanning spreads, we must assure that the original data does not change. The data files from scanning projects are often used to activate electronic instruments. Expression coding in these files is mathematically converted from the Ampico format into MIDI or other forms of dynamics. If the authors of the conversion programs don't fully understand the Ampico code, then the conversions are wrong. The Ampico system is complex, and few people fully understand it. The purpose of this presentation is to increase the understanding of the Ampico dynamic code. This will be done by exploring the less obvious mechanics of that system. Coupled with the more common knowledge, an expanded explanation of Ampico coding will be introduced. The scope of this discussion will cover Ampico systems from about 1920 to the end of its production. Several reference sources are used in this presentation. Here are the key ones. The Inspector's Instruction Book, 1919 with 1920 supplement. Inspector's Test Roll, 1922. The Ampico Reproducing Piano by Richard J. Howe. Photographs from the Larry Givens collection, and numerous original Ampico rolls. I found out early in my investigations of Ampico coding the best way to learn the system was to observe the code on original rolls. Printed claims by roll companies may have stretched the truth, or even intentionally hidden various methods. Instructions to service personnel found on test rolls were not intended to teach the theory of editing, but rather impart the general knowledge of the system mechanics. Part of what is presented here today is from my observations and may not be otherwise documented. As background, we need to clarify terms and identify the expression holes in the tracker bar. The Ampico A tracker bar has holes that control expression at each edge, 7 on the treble side and 7 on the bass side. We identify the holes by counting from the outer edge. If the hole is on the treble side, we place a T behind the whole number. If the hole is on the bass side, we place a B behind the whole number. Hole number 3 of the treble side activates the soft pedal. The loud pedal is on the bass side, and it too is hole number 3. Holes 1 and 5 are for the crescendo on each side. We'll talk more about them later. That leaves holes 2, 4, 6, and 7 on each side that are used to control the step intensity system. Expression valves triggered by holes 2, 4, and 6, once opened, are locked on until canceled by hole 7 being opened. We call hole 7 the cancel hole. Of course, holes 2, 4, and 6 must be closed for the cancel hole to function on each. The pneumatic stack is divided in the middle. The bass and treble sides each have identical step expression units. First, let's look at what Ampico had to publicly say about how their system worked. The 1919 Inspector's Instruction Book gives us an introduction to the 7-step Ampico system. The piano volume goes from minimum at level 1 to a maximum at level 7. The book explains how 7 fixed steps ride on top of the crescendo effect. Using the crescendo by itself, the volume can also go from minimum to maximum. If the crescendo is used in conjunction with any of the 7 steps, the results are additive, but never go above the maximum of step 7. Level 7 is as high as it can go. If the crescendo has partially raised the volume, the 7 steps are still available, but are squeezed into the remaining available range. Now at this point, it sounds as if the system has too many variables to have a simplified discussion. That is correct, and it is my challenge to make it simple. Some early rolls used the crescendo as the primary device, with the steps only adding accents. We'll call that system crescendo primary. Fortunately, a very early decision at Ampico standardized the use of the crescendo device as a touch-up to the steps. In that scheme, the crescendo appears as brief adjustments to the step codes. Let's call that system of coding step primary. When hole number 1 is opened, the slow crescendo effect begins and continues until the hole is closed. It takes about 9 seconds for a full slow crescendo to maximum volume. Slow decrescendo occurs when hole number 1 is closed. If hole number 5 is opened simultaneously with hole number 1, the crescendo becomes fast, and full volume occurs in about 2 seconds. Hole number 5, when open, always makes the effect fast in both the crescendo and in the decrescendo. Here is an early roll in which the crescendo code was primary and the steps were added to give accents. Even though the remainder of this discussion will concentrate on the step primary system, this roll illustrates how we may discern the editing methods by just looking at the roll. When this roll starts, there are crescendo perforations even before the first notes. This means the initial volume is set using crescendos and steps. Obviously, this is a crescendo primary roll, as every phrase contains long perforations for the crescendos. This kind of roll is rare in that Ampico upgraded many of their best early rolls. This roll was originally issued as a Stoddard Ampico roll. Now let's turn attention to the step intensities. The air motor is running at tempo 70 when all readings are taken. Most grand pianos operate at a minimum vacuum level of about 7 inches of water column. When hole number 2 is opened, that increases a small amount, say about 1 inch, giving an 8-inch reading. When only hole 4 is opened, the change is more. It usually has an increase of about 2 or 3 inches, giving a 9 or 10-inch reading. If only hole 6 is opened, expect to get about a 12-inch reading, or an increase of 5 inches. The reading should be the same on both sides, bass and treble. The above configurations give us the first 4 levels in the 7-level system of steps. Step numbers are confusing. We'll usually just tell you which tracker holes are open. The exception is when we speak of the maximum step volume. We'll refer to that as level number 7. Now, by various combinations of holes 2, 4, and 6 being open, we can complete the 7-step system. Holes 2 and 6 together form the next step. This is followed by hole 4 and 6 together. Finally, level 7 is achieved by opening all 3 holes, 2, 4, and 6 at once. You may notice that we skipped the combination of holes 2 and 4 open together, as it gives almost the same result as hole 6 open by itself. It is just slightly less. It is this 7-step explanation that has led many people, including some scanned roll programmers, to overlook the full Ampico A code scheme. Actually, these 7 basic steps can be expanded into 21 steps in theory. In practice, some of these 21 steps are overlapping and difficult to use. These additional steps are not an oddity, but rather a key component of almost all Ampico A rolls. Normally, the pump is set at a vacuum of about 20 inches. The pump is equipped with an amplifier that can boost the vacuum pressure to 30 inches in certain circumstances. The amplifier is activated by vacuum in the pneumatic stack. If the stack vacuum gets up to about 15 inches, the amplifier starts closing the spill valve on the pump, and the result is a higher vacuum output at the pump. The amplifier is controlled by both the bass and treble side of the pneumatic stack. The side with the highest vacuum controls the amplifier. The amplifier is slow to react, taking 1/2 of a second to fully collapse. While this sounds fairly fast, in music it is an eternity compared to 16th notes. We will refer to a specific note that is the object of dynamic coding as the target note. Given the slow response time of the amplifier, quick accents can be coded on the roll, and the amplifier never moves. As an example, holes 2, 4, and 6 are opened just a fraction before the target note occurs. Then, as the note is played, the cancel hole removes those intensity inputs. The result is that the target note is struck with a vacuum pressure of about 20 inches. Had level 7 been set more than 1/2 second before the target note, the amplifier would fully close, and the note would be struck at a pump vacuum of 30 inches. So clearly, step level 7 can produce more than one volume level. For all this to occur, the drawer modify switch must be in the brilliant position, which is the position that renders the music at full fidelity. Other positions of the switch suppress the expression. Looking at the 1922 test roll, we see that the amplifier should start to change the pump output when the expression holes 2 and 6 are opened. From page 71 of the inspector's reference book, we see that the amplifier should start to close at about 15 inches. From our test on the piano, we see that 2 and 6 yields a reading of 14.5 inches, which verifies the reference book. When holes 4 and 6 are opened, the amplifier should be fully collapsed, and the pump should be at its maximum vacuum. Getting the amplifier to give these exact results is a bit tricky, but it can be done. Late in Ampico A production, the pump amplifier was modified to be more accurate. It contains elements that are similar to the Ampico B. The sleeve pneumatic A system is very reliable once properly adjusted. Since either side of the stack can drive the amplifier, clever coding can give many steps. For example, with the bass side set for some time in excess of 1/2 second with holes 2 and 6 open, while the treble side is at minimum, then just before the target treble note is struck, the treble expression is set to level 7, holes 2, 4, and 6 open. Then that target note will be somewhere between 20 and 30 inches, as the amplifier is only partially collapsed. So now we have 3 distinct volumes available at step 7. Using the same scheme, other levels can also be shown to have 3 distinct volumes. In fact, all 7 steps can have 3 volumes. But in practicality, at softer levels, the amplifier system is not needed. Here is accenting at level 7 without amplification. Notice the cancel occurs as the target note is played. Here is loud playing at level 7 with no cancel after each note. Those of you who are familiar with the Ampico B system will see a similarity to 3 levels of pump output. It is really the same scheme, but just accomplished in a different manner. Ampico was doing this type of coding as early as 1916, perhaps much earlier. In fact, the concert demonstration instruments that toured used this system with a super expanded vacuum scale. I'm not going to discuss it here because there's not enough time, but the range of vacuum varied at the high end to levels of over 55 inches. Look at this original placard from the Mason and Hamlin demonstration instrument. Notice the second amplifier level. This is not an Ampico B. It is a special version of the Ampico A, and it plays ordinary rolls, which means the coding is clearly based on multiple pump vacuum levels. Before we discuss the Ampico B, let's look at some common code patterns. When quick accents are used during mezzo forte play, the code setting the accent is quickly canceled before the amplifier can collapse. These code patterns are easy to see as the cancel hole perforation is longer than the 2, 4, or 6. A clue that the editors want the plane to stay soft is the alternate setting for level 4, which is holes 2 and 4. Once fortissimo playing begins, these patterns change. The cancel perforation only occurs just preceding a required volume change. In other words, the louder levels are always on, either in the bass or treble. This assures that the amplifier is active and the pump is now in the range above 25 inches. Often the higher levels are set on the half of the keyboard that is not playing. This allows the editors to make sudden wide swings in dynamics, using the full resources of the pump without any delay. Now let's look briefly at the Ampico B system. Like its predecessor, it uses a combination of intensity steps and crescendo to control the piano volume. The big difference is that neither the crescendo nor the step system operating alone can bring the piano to maximum volume. The two components must work together. Both must be at their highest levels for the piano to play at full volume. It is this characteristic that makes some Ampico A rolls play poorly on the B system. Look at this statement from Dr. Hickman's diary. The date is November 1926. This certainly led to the decision of putting the B-coded rolls on the market 2 years before the B piano was introduced. For people writing algorithms for the Ampico code, the B system should be easier. Still, the system is misunderstood. In this discussion of the B, the terms crescendo and amplifier will be used interchangeably. The pump amplifier in the B system is really just the crescendo device. It can be locked partially on or nearly fully on, giving the pump 3 stages of output. The locking device is called the amplifier trigger. It is this trigger operation that sometimes is misunderstood. At the fast rate, it takes the crescendo device 1/2 second to fully collapse. So when the crescendo is at rest, a full volume accent cannot occur instantly. To make rapid, loud accents with no delay, the crescendo can be locked into first or second stage amplification in advance of the required accent. Then the rapid accent can be had almost instantly by using the step mechanism. The Ampico B tracker bar has 2 extra holes, one at each end. The extra holes are given the numbers 0 so that the numbering scheme from the A tracker can be carried over to the B. When the base hole 0B is opened, the amplifier trigger pneumatic is opened. Additionally, the 0B hole opens the fast crescendo hole by means of a valve. The trigger has lugs that engage indentations on the amplifier rod. Code to lock the amplifier on is done by two holes in the tracker bar. When the trigger hole and the slow crescendo hole are open together, the open trigger stops the collapse of the crescendo rod at its midpoint. When the 0B is closed, the trigger returns to its normal position. The crescendo becomes locked in first amplification. Opening the trigger hole without the crescendo hole causes the trigger to release the captured amplifier rod. If a second set of brief trigger holes occurs while the crescendo hole is still open, the trigger again opens, and this time it captures the crescendo in a nearly fully collapsed position. This is second amplification. It is this two-step sequence that has led to misunderstanding. Some programmers believe that without these two steps, the crescendo cannot be locked into second amplification. This is not true. There is a third function not explained in the manual. We call it the under-rod capture. Dr. Hickman realized it would be necessary in certain circumstances to lock the amplifier after a crescendo had been initiated. A small ramp on the trigger mechanism allows it to pass beneath the rod by forcing the rod upwards. Thus, the trigger can engage the rod and lock in to second amplification without the crescendo being initially fully at rest. In these cases, a single 0B hole occurs well after the start of a crescendo perforation at hole 1. The frequent conversion error is that since only one set of trigger perforations is used, the conversion program only sets first amplification. This then throws the following volume levels way off. We realize this is a lot to absorb in a little time, but there is one more tricky detail. Once the amplifier is locked into the first stage, full volume on the piano cannot be attained. This is because the locking device restricts the rod movement from going beyond a point where the second amplification lock occurs. The piano can still play fairly loud, but just not at maximum. The importance of this detail is somewhat minor, but still it is there and must be considered if there are conversion processes being applied. The emphasis in this presentation has been on the Ampico A, but both systems have been explained enough to provide a basis for further learning. The most important fact discussed is the expanded 7-step system of the Ampico A, which really has many more steps and are used on almost every roll. For those of you who want to continue the Ampico tradition, I urge you not to truncate or otherwise limit the fidelity found in the original Ampico rolls. If you are establishing any kind of archive file, include sufficient documentation of methods used, so that at some future point the merits of your work can be verified. For those of you who want to learn more about the Ampico code, try watching the code as it goes by on a roll that is being played. If you lose track, stop the piano and figure it out. Play the roll at half speed. Use B-coded classical rolls to help understand the A system. Watch the coding after the B set's first amplification, and note that the step codes seldom drop below the 2/6 setting. And then find a second at second amplification, and note the step codes maintain a 4/6 setting or above on at least one side. Soon you will be able to watch at tempo 100 and not miss a trick. Your knowledge will help keep the memory of the Ampico alive. Better yet, the best way to keep the memory of the Ampico alive is to restore in a meticulous manner a fine original Ampico and let it play for all to hear. Its glory does not need to be lost. Get busy and just do it.